Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth. Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the show. I am sending out that Subsplash link right now. There we go. Look, if you have our Subsplash, if you have the Armor of Truth mobile app, I've confused myself. You will have just received the notification that this show is now live, and you have to give me a second to get this out of the way, right? You guys don't want to see that? And now we're ready to do the show. All right. All right, folks. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live number 242. Sloppy start, but let's hope it gets better from here. What we're going to talk about today is the children being thrown to the wolves. What's happening is it okay that children are treated as science experiments? Matthew 18:6 is where Jesus warns, use it in the context of little ones. Right? If he calls one of these little ones to sin, it would be better for you if there was a millstone around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. Deuteronomy 32:35 says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and they will pay. Any moment they will slip, and calamity will come on them swiftly." Now, there's two whistleblowers that have come forward recently to speak to cityjournal.org. One is a physician, one is a healthcare worker. One of the whistleblowers has come forward with allegations against Dr. Richard Ogden Roberts, one of the leaders of Texas Children's Hospital. And this worker has spent a significant amount of time observing Roberts working with gender dysphoric patients and their families. He says, "I'm absolutely sick to my stomach," expressing heartbreak at the number of children who have been led down the path of sterilization and regret. He said, quote, "We're ruining them." So let's look at this first. Yeah, right off the bat, let's tell you this statement from John Calvin. When God wants to judge a nation, gives them wicked rulers. It's hard to argue with that today, right? Look at this on Twitter from Christopher Ruffo. "This is haunting. A doctor at a major children's hospital explains how puberty blockers shut down a child's hypothalamus, which controls emotions, sexuality, and the aesthetic sense." The point here is, as you'll hear later, the hypothalamus is not just it's not just like a computer chip. It's not just something that can be talked about in a cold sense. It has a lot to do with how we experience the world, controlling other hormones, how we feel when we see a beautiful sunset. Do you get that sense of awe? Do you feel the urge to pay closer attention to things when when they're beautiful. These are the kinds of things that get turned off, or that's possible to get turned off. Well, and a child can eventually just become cold, indifferent, and zombie-like. To shut down that system is to shut down what makes us human. Now, this starts off in we're talking about here the context of gender cultists, right? How far would you go to protect your child? That's the question we want to start off with today. How far would you go to protect your child from a dangerous cult? Let's just think of it in terms like that. Take all the political stuff out of it. How far would you go to protect your child from a dangerous cult? A cult where many of the recruits end up psychologically and physically traumatized in some ways that can never be reversed. A cult that manipulates your child and coerces the people and institutions all around you by taking advantage of the human instinct to be accepted. We don't want to be seen as hateful. By taking advantage of the fear of being cast out of society altogether. A cult that maximizes its grip on your child's mind by taking advantage of negative emotions, such as envy, to provoke both a desire to fit in with the cult and an addictive response to the cult's messaging. Now, this is where social media comes in to the mix. Social media has been perhaps the most effective tool used by this cult to infiltrate and get control of your child's mind. And, of course, also to get control of your family. Psychologist Sam Vaknin is known for his work on narcissistic personality disorder and its impact on individuals and society. He's also researched and written extensively on the topic of social media's impact in the culture as a whole, too. He's considered to be an expert in the field. So, according to Vaknin, social media platforms provide a fertile ground for narcissists to cultivate false images of themselves and to also to do this on others. To cultivate false realities in order to manipulate others for their own gain. This manipulation has specifically been targeted at your children. And, the nature of the internet, the anonymity or the false image aspect of social media, the distance between people conversing, right? It's very easy to fire off harsh missives at others who you'll never see. Right? The lack of immediate consequences in online interactions, that lulls the mind of a vulnerable child into a false sense of security while at the same time influencing their thoughts and emotions in such a way that the child is essentially defenseless to the advances of the cult. Constant exposure to such carefully curated and idealized digital spaces on social media can cause, for one thing, feelings of inadequacy, can bring on that feeling of envy, and can definitely create a distorted perception of reality. The major social media platforms were created for this purpose, to keep a person engaged, to increase screen time, to keep you on the platform, right? Make sure that you stay there as long as possible, right? And then to guide the user into a particular mindset and to create loyalty in you, to create loyalty in the consumer. In fact, the goal is to addict consumers who not only buy the products and services that are offered, but especially in children, they take on the very personality of the influencers that they spend so much time with, that they come to love, and who are, knowingly or not, playing a role in grooming young people to offer themselves on the altar for the good of the cult. How far would you go to protect your child. How much is custody or quality time with your son or daughter worth to you? Right now, the largest, most perverted, and most deceptively influential cult we have ever seen is testing parents to find out whether or not they will fight, to find out whether or not you will sacrifice for your child, or whether you, like many have and are doing, will acquiesce and offer your child up on their altar. President Joe Biden likes to say, these are our kids, not somebody else's kids. They're all our kids. He's talking specifically about when a child makes a claim of dysphoria, gender dysphoria. Immediately becomes our child. This is the theme and the purpose of this cult. So in addition to the almost incessant engagement with social media in the daily lives of children today, they're also in their physical lives. There are teachers, activists, influencers, and therapists, and they're all making suggestions, outright dictating to a child that, for example, she might be a boy. Maybe she would feel better and be more confident. Perhaps she would be more popular if she accepted her true self. It's very seductive messaging for a child to encounter. And the moment she takes the bait and says, yeah, I want to be popular, a wire is tripped. As if the whole cult just received an alert that a new convert has come. And at that instant, your child becomes Biden's child. Worse yet, becomes all our kids, like property of the state, a refugee from spiteful parents, and another recruit in an army that marches under its own flag and is taking territory fast without ever having fired a shot. So this article here at compactmag.com, this is written by Abigail Schreier. She's the one who wrote the the book that is, let's see, I don't know if we have that book around here right now. She wrote the book on gender dysphoria. But what the article basically says here, it's about AB 957 in California. And we've covered that here in the last couple of shows that we've done. Essentially, what you learn here is that the state is watching you and it is listening. And this cult is ever prepared to deploy its troops into your town, into your home. The Psychological Operations Unit, social media, public schools, activists, celebrities, and influencers have done their job, and now, like a rainbow airborne unit, they parachute in behind enemy lines, which is the family home, to liberate children from the only adults in the realm who are desperately devoted to their welfare. Now, that's not true in 100% of the cases. Let's just say that up front. But they're not really interested in liberating children from abusive situations, real abusive situations. They have a whole new category now. But this is even worse than a cult. This is state-sponsored abduction and the creation of a new class of citizens who are either too blind to care or too fearful to act. California Bill AB 957 directs family court judges to award custody in part on, quote, a parent's affirmation of a child's gender identity, which the bill defines as intrinsic to the health, safety, and welfare of the child. What this does is this places affirmation of a gender confusion. It makes it one of the criteria for determining whether or not a child is abused. How far must you go as a parent to prove affirmation of your child's perceived gender? Well, in the bill, There's no definition of that. Affirmation can include anything from allowing your daughter to adopt a male name and pronouns to commencing a schedule of hormones and surgeries that are obviously risky in different ways, irreversible, and without any evidence whatsoever that they provide a mental health benefit. Quote, unquote, gender-affirming medicine, such as puberty blockers, are now sacraments in this religious cult. And they can produce permanent sexual dysfunction, infertility, can diminish cognitive development, and undermine bone density, weaken tooth enamel. And that's just what we know. This is just in the last few years of experimentation being done on the youth in America. What is affirmation then, right? If that's what it comes down to, and now the bill also allows many other activist organizations to bring evidence against a parent. Now, for now, this is typically, from what I can tell, reading the bill, it's really about, it'll come up more often in custody cases. So family court is where you would see this. But wherever it is, how do you decide? How do you know what affirmation is? They don't define it. Does affirmation mean allowing your 12-year-old daughter to change her name to Bruce? Or do you also have to consent to her medically unnecessary double mastectomy? In a state where these chemical and surgical options are possibilities for minors, parental endurance becomes the only limiting factor. How much damage would you have to encounter for the chance to hold your daughter's hand in recovery? For another, few parents are brave enough to test it. Consider what's at stake, the crucible. Accept the affirmation condition and greenlight your child's gender transition and hope for the best, or reject the condition and the gender train rolls on anyway, just without you. In fact, you might be in jail. What do you do as a parent? I think a lot of the advice today is get out of that state. How can any legislator honestly claim that affirmation of a child's gender identity is always in her best interest? If she is the 12th child to do so, or maybe she's out of 50 kids in the 7th grade, maybe she's the 12th one that's done it. All right, if she arrives maybe at this epiphany after 6 hours of YouTube videos from one particular influencer, doesn't matter. They give no criteria on this. A child could decide, literally, make the decision, and an hour later start the process to have a parent charged or arrested. Right? Is there any chance the child is succumbing to peer influence that we just described about social media? Any chance of that at all? No. There's no chance of that as far as the state is concerned. Is there any chance that the parents who have raised the child might know her a little better than she knows herself? They might know her a little better than the state does. Today, the notion that affirmation is necessarily is in the best interest of every child can no longer be seriously believed. Many people are well aware that the state is not acting in the best interest of children, surely in California. Even in the face of today, where we see repentance in some countries. In the last 2 years, England, Sweden, Finland, France, and Norway have all conducted rigorous scientific reviews of these pediatric gender clinics and pediatric gender medicine. And they've concluded the opposite of what California has concluded. So who's telling the truth? Who's actually following the science? The efficacy is far too doubtful. The harms too grave. These countries, every one of them, are liberal countries, responded to their independent reviews by shuttering pediatric gender clinics, curtailing the availability of these medicines, and restricting them to experimental settings, or they banned them entirely. So what are we doing in the United States? Looks an awful lot like we're throwing our children to the wolves. And this is where we get to the story about the whistleblower. Let's welcome to the show the lovely Summer.
Greetings, everyone.
There she is.
Good to see you.
Summer has joined us. As you can tell, she wasn't here by the sloppy start I had.
I had to turn the light on.
Oh, the Watchman, yeah. I didn't have the lamp behind me on. I didn't have anything right. I had the whiteboard in the shot. There's all kinds of stuff going wrong here.
That's okay. It looks
Summer is here,
good.
and
it looks good.
Everything is under control. That we're all together.
You're looking sharp in your blazer.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very serious show. It is a serious show.
Well, it is, yeah.
Well, let's talk about this for a minute, son. Let's go into this by Christopher Ruffo. I want to say Rufo, but writing for City Journal, the title of this article is Thrown to the Wolves. A physician reveals the nightmare of transgender ideology in a major children's hospital. So what we're gonna hear is some behind the scenes information. Now this is from a physician, as we just said, who has once again, works in a major children's hospital in a blue city. That means in a progressive democratic area, like, for example, Seattle or Los Angeles, or you could say anywhere today. Definitely anywhere in New York or California. But there are in other places too. And then there's another article to follow up behind it, an article that was actually released earlier on May 23rd, titled They're Wanting to Play God. And it's from another whistleblower who is not a physician but is a healthcare professional who had direct access to one of these doctors who is, well, making a name for himself with this movement. So this physician, whistleblower, so they're anonymous at this point anyway. This physician has witnessed firsthand how transgender ideology has captured the medical profession and how it jeopardized the first commandment of the healing sciences. The Hippocratic Oath, right? Do no harm. The first question the reporter asks is, what is it like in a major children's hospital in the United States regarding transgender interventions for children? In other words, what is the state of healthcare today when it comes to this? He said there are really two major points, and the only way to really understand this transgender movement is within the context of the pandemic. He says the cultural shift that happened in 2020, that's the best way to approach that question, because he says, quote, transgender ideology and COVID are inextricably linked. So there are two major points he brings up. They are decrees and censorship. First of all, in 2020, we started getting medical decrees without peer review. Just listen to the experts. You don't need data. You saw it with masks, social distancing, and EUAs, or emergency youth authorizations, which reminds me we have up on our Substack right now. You can also find that through the Armor of Truth mobile app. You can read an article posted by Summer about the abuse of national and public health emergencies over the years. In that article, we've got information going back to 9/11, at least back farther. But
what was it? 22 or 21 emergencies declared?
Yes, the number right now, as it stood, the latest number is like there were 27, perhaps. I think it's 27 today, or the last count would have been for that we were able to get was for 2021, the year ending. In other words, at any one time over the past during the national security age, 27 mm-hmm. During the age of national security, an average of probably about 20 national emergencies that are ongoing, that are renewed every year. Why do you think do we really still need to have a national emergency in effect from 9/11? Well, the reason they do that, read the article and find out. The reason that's done is because it gives them broad powers. Right? A public health emergency declaration gives the Department of Health and Human Services great reach. Extends their power. Gives them, in some cases, unconstitutional power. That's not supposed to. But of course they use it for that. So, two major points: decrees and censorship. This is one of the results of public health emergency was this idea of decreed mandates, masks, jabs, social distancing, all of it with no justification, no sound science. Secondly, censorship. Of course, we're all aware of that here. If you ask questions, if you challenge the state orthodoxy on these issues, if you express doubt in the decrees, then you stand a good chance of being publicly humiliated, severely reprimanded. For these doctors and these medical professionals, you could be fired. You could lose your career. But 2020, that's when transgender ideology really took off. Academic institutions, so-called experts in the field of transgender medicine would simply declare that puberty blockers and other interventions were the gold standard of care. That means this is the default. This is the best course of treatment when you have a child present with these symptoms, of which there are no real symptoms. The evidence to support all of this is completely fraudulent, says the physician. But dissent is not permitted. If you question transgender ideology, you would suffer the same type of repercussions that had happened during COVID. So you get the same treatment if you denied transgender ideology that you would get, for example, if you weren't wearing your mask in the mall or something like that. But even worse. The best way to describe the environment, says the physician, this whistleblower, would be authoritarian, censorious, or censorship, a culture that discourages any meaningful debate and encourages the demonization of anyone who asks questions. Rufo asks next, what are the main tenets of transgender medical theory? Transgender medical theory. So this will be a new topic for us here. The ones that are enforced as orthodoxy, right? As conventional wisdom. How have those tenets changed medical practice? So what are the tenets of transgender medical theory? He starts off and says, number one, when an individual believes he or she is of a certain sex, then he or she is truly of that sex. That's number one. Number two, the ideal response to this is to affirm that individual's preferred identity. Number three, the repercussions for not affirming, for non-intervention, is a higher likelihood that that individual would commit suicide. That's the claim. Those are three major tenets of transgender medical theory. And you can see what the problem is here. It's all about preventing someone from harming themselves. Now, this is what's known as an appeal to consequences. This is a logical fallacy. An appeal to consequences is where someone says our position is valid, is true, because if it's not true, there'll be a horrible outcome. Right? Without any evidence. So this is not science at all. So without any true evidence to support, it's consequences rather than evidence. It's actually imagined consequences rather than evidence. So this is why it pays. This is why today, more than ever, we need to be able to understand and identify when we see fallacies. The fact that the public education system has been responsible for dumbing down our culture, in America at least. Over the past 70 years, you could have never got something like this by the Americans of 1923. It would have been more difficult. So it all comes down to preventing the child from harming themselves. And that's devious, right? That's the work of the devil, because Satan is the author of confusion. The adversary is the father of lies, the author of confusion. And so where you see things like this, where there's so much at stake and there's no clear evidence, there's a lot of, right, it's emotional. No one wants anyone to harm themselves, so let's do whatever we can to keep them from harming themselves. What is it, Summer? If we
can just save one life.
Right, if we just one life is saved. We dealt with that too. That's also fallacious. Right? See, when you say that, if it saves just one life, we'll do whatever it takes. No, that's not always the right answer.
It's using that mechanism of that lever of guilt, guilting people, shaming people.
Also, it says here, the physician says the threat of self-harm, I'm just going to say self-harm because saying that S word tends to get videos, hidden, which they already are. But the threat of self-harm removes any of the guardrails, right? Any of the safety mechanisms that would normally be in place melt away. They disappear, right, when the threat of self-harm is introduced. Any of the guardrails for what we must do to affirm that individual's identity. Whatever it takes to affirm what they feel or believe is true, even if it's not. Now that can't be sincere medicine. That can't be science.
Can I
jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to just read this quote from an article that Jennifer Bielek put out this past week.
Okay.
Is humanity ready for the LGBTQ, you know what I'm going with, tech babies and the full erasure of women from reproduction? So right here, she has this brilliant paragraph where she just sort of sums this whole thing up. And she says, if you build gender clinics, create specialized gender medicine, add gender psychiatric care to the psychological associations, create an educational apparatus to teach gender theory in schools, and instruct the media how to speak about this corporate construct, quote, special humans, and tie it all to a human rights movement, then you've really laid the groundwork for a new and profitable industry in body dissociation. If you then bombard the public with a massive propaganda campaign about special gender people born in wrong bodies who can be liberated through the help of the medical industrial complex and exalt those who choose this path, your business is going to be enormously successful. This is what we see all around us. So many of us can't recognize the industry because we've been trained to understand this as a human rights issue for the marginalized. The political and marketing groundwork was laid before patients or special exalted identities even arrived, not the other way around. So it's marketing.
Marketing for sure, right? And I remember.
And a legal framework, marketing and a legal framework.
Right. So essentially, in a secular society, this becomes the truth, right? Because now it's law. And a secular society doesn't have anything to appeal to beyond the state, so this is religious.
And you've got the corporations that are backing this whole thing up.
Yeah.
So.
Well, as the whistleblower says here, it's which article was that, Bob Bielik? Was that?
That's it. That's it right there.
Okay.
It's like it's about the last paragraph.
Yeah.
That's what I just read from. And it's also in the community post as well.
All right, so check our community post here on YouTube for that one. So we're talking here also about puberty blockers. The whistleblower was talking about that. We've talked about that here before. It's almost instantaneous. If a teenage girl shows up at the guidance counselor and says, I think I'm a boy, I really feel like I'm a boy, almost immediately, the puberty blockers are offered at least. And why that's terrible is because when you offer the puberty blockers, which is supposed to stop the menstrual cycle if it has begun. If it hasn't begun, it's supposed to delay the onset. But what happens is almost every time that it's a female, puberty blockers are given. Now these puberty blockers are the same. These are the same drugs. I forgot the name of the drug. We talked about this here before. The same drugs that are used for chemical castration of sex offenders in prison. So, but anyway, when these puberty blockers are given, almost always the testosterone follows. If it's a girl, because the goal is to appear more masculine, right? So when puberty blockers are given to a young female, and then testosterone on top of that, almost every time that destroys the ability to reproduce. And that's what this whistleblower is saying. This is why it's such a terrible thing, because these kids really don't understand. You can't assume that they do. A lot of these children are minors. Puberty blockers become justified at 11 years old. Hormones become justified at 13 years old. Double mastectomy becomes justified even before the age of 18. So in reality, the whistleblower says, when you affirm these individuals, when you affirm them in their idea of their gender identity, what you're doing is affirming their hatred for themselves. So let's make let's offer a disclaimer here. This does happen to people, this thing called gender dysphoria, but it is extremely rare. What we've seen recently over the past, since 2020 for sure, and probably over the past 10 years, we've covered this here before. We've talked about how significant and to what percentage you're seeing way more claims of this today. And this is because of social media influencers, activists.
Sex ed.
Yeah, so the teachers, sex education, the public school system is full of activists today, as is social media. So you're affirming these individuals, you're affirming their hatred for themselves, because that's what they're telling you. They're telling you that they hate their body. What they need is truth. Children who are going through confusing times, going through difficult times, when you affirm this belief system that they bring to you, what you're really doing is you're telling them, quote, you hate yourself at this moment, and I'm going to affirm you in that, unquote. So this is that idea, once again, of empathy, right? The word empathy has been taken and weaponized, right? Today, to empathize means to affirm someone, even if they're in a delusion. But the question comes, why do these people have such high suicide rates, right? It's what's interesting is that it's not those who don't receive gender-affirming care who self-harm. It's those who do. That's just the science. Well, the reason that they feel like self-harming is because they're affirming, as the physician says here, we are affirming that they should hate themselves and that they should try to destroy themselves. So that makes perfect sense. Rufo goes on to ask, these are medical doctors, right? These are the people that we're supposed to trust.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're a small child and that's the education system that you're coming up in, and those are supposed to be the people that know what's going on. They're the people that have been here for several decades, and you're just fresh on the scene, and they're all saying, yeah, you can become the opposite sex now. Hooray, let's go celebrate. Let's have a party. Let's get you going on it.
Well, these are doctors. In the American culture anyway, doctors have been respected and revered for their knowledge and their adherence to science, but not these doctors. These doctors we're talking about here today, that they've bought into this, not just abstractly but concretely, because they're the ones doing the surgeries, right? They've bought into the false ideology of transgenderism, and when people have a false ideology, they need a way to separate themselves from non-believers. They need a way to be able to express their faith to other believers, right? In other words, this is again why the transgender ideology system is a religion. It's dogmatic, and those who are in it need to seek support. These doctors and healthcare professionals who have bought into it, they want others around them who have done it too, because people don't want to feel like outcasts. It's inherent to us. So they seek support, or they seek to be affirmed in their sin. That's what they're looking to do. That's what they want. That's why this is able to get traction and grow so fast, because there are those around who are willing to affirm them in their sin. And it's because most of them is because they're afraid. Romans 1, verse 32, they know God's righteous decree that those who engage in such depravity deserve death. They not only continue to do it, they also approve, support, celebrate, and seek others to do it also. The whistleblower says, if these rituals are not derived from a cultural heritage with a moral tradition, they become susceptible to unbound human depravity. Now that is dead on. That is the truth. In other words, if you don't have a worldview that is true, that is based in truth, that can be tested, if you've got a worldview that has holes in it or affirms things to be true that are not true, then you're susceptible to this. When you look at the Judeo-Christian tradition, you have the outlawing of child sacrifice and other ways that standards were codified. But in transgender ideology, none of these guardrails exist. So what becomes the greatest expression of faith to other believers? Well, it's to sacrifice the most pure and innocent. Same thing with the abortion industry. Once they do that, they become heroes, right? Among the abortion activists, the abortionists, the doctors, they're the heroes. They're on the front lines. in this war against life. And for the transgender ideology or transgender medical theory, these doctors become the heroes. And so the children become the sacrifices. The pure and the innocent become the sacrifices. Once they do that, then they become heroes. They become martyrs. They have their flag hung up at the White House, and there's no going back. Because if they were to demonstrate any degree of humility, they would have to come to terms with the fact that they advocated for and participated in a practice that destroyed the lives of innocent children. Proverbs 11:12 says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but it leads to death. We need to seek the eternal wisdom of God, a standard that doesn't change, that has never changed, will never change. It's the only. Is that is that the puberty blocker?
Yeah, I think so.
Leuprolide acetate, one of the puberty blockers. Yeah, that's. And again, no long-term testing. They don't do that anymore, apparently, in the medical profession. 2 Timothy 2:26 tells us that it's possible for someone, it's possible even for a believer to, for a time, to be captured to do the devil's will. So we have to be on guard for these things. So what about what's happening to these kids and their health outcomes? The reporter asks, and the physician responds. He gives an anecdotal story. Says there was a child in the children's hospital in his teens who had a really bad Crohn's disease, to the point where he'd already had multiple surgeries. And that child would always be coming back to the hospital and back to the operating room. But one day, at the same time that this child was being rolled down the hall to the operating room, another child was headed into another operating room to get an implant put into his arm so that his hormones could be suppressed. The first child with the Crohn's disease had no choice. Was truly born this way. Had no control over his condition of Crohn's. Now, I might say that I'm sure even he was born that way. There are a lot of ways to acquire that, and the vaccine schedule would be one of them, but that's for another story. But this child was, in this story, as we're looking at, was born that way. There's nothing, it wasn't up to him. This happened to him. There was no way to prevent it from happening, but the second kid was put into that situation because of the psychiatrists and the psychologists and the doctors and the politicians and those in the media who convinced him that this was the correct thing to do to cure his mental anguish. You're going to feel better. That's the promise. Now, this should weigh heavily on the consciences of the doctors who did this to a child who had the opportunity to live a normal, healthy life, to have a normal and healthy childhood. At some point, this child is going to wake up and he's going to realize that this was an awful mistake. He's going to realize it was unnecessary. He's going to realize that his sexual organs are permanently mutilated. He's going to realize that the balance of his hormones is completely destroyed. He's going to have to be taking hormonal supplements forever. And he's going to realize that there's no going back. What he's going to realize is that all the adults that were around him that were supposed to be looking out for him, the people who were supposed to protect him, threw him to the wolves. Threw him on the altar of the transgender religion to be another experiment.
That would create an incredible amount of anger.
And it will. You're going to have a whole whole generation. I heard Robert Kennedy talking on Joe Rogan's podcast yesterday, and he brought up an interesting point, which is about autism. And so Joe Rogan's 55. So Kennedy Kennedy's a little older than that. He's in his 60s. But Kennedy made the observation. He said, well, he asked Joe, in your age bracket, the friends that you were in school with, the friends that you know that are your age, do you know anybody? Anybody who's autistic? Anybody who's, like seriously, who's head banging, who's seriously way over on the spectrum? And the truth is, Rogan said, no, he really didn't. Summer and I were talking about this the other day. I remember where I live, there was like one child in each class. Right, so there were 288 people in my graduating class. And so we went through kindergarten all the way through 12th grade together, and there was one boy who was...
Yeah, it was like, and my mother put me in different schools constantly, like every year I was pulled out to another school district, and so I got to see a lot of kids, a big sampling, and I just really never, there wasn't autism when I was a kid, and I was growing up mainly in the 80s when I was,
Yeah. And now, and as
80s,
RFK...
90s.
Yeah, as Kennedy said, that is because at some point in the 1980s is when the vaccine schedule changed, and Kennedy made he said when he was a child, he had 3 vaccinations. I remember I saw my vaccine card. There's less than 10 on there. That's 1971. I'll give you that. I'll give you my date. But so, but then he said, RFK said that his children, like his youngest children, who were in their 20s or 30s by this point, had as many as 72 shots. That's what was required. That was the schedule. And we have family members who have young children who have similar experiences. So. Is all of that necessary? Were people living just fine before that? I mean, is it really all that necessary? Where did all of these allergies come from all of a sudden? Well, this would be the aluminums or the aluminum products that are found in these. It's the adjuvants. So when a vaccine is made, there's something in it called an adjuvant, and there's a type of vaccine that's a dead virus vaccine. So the body won't react to that. So what they do is they try to put something in that vaccine that will cause the body's immune response to happen. And so when it happens, it's looking for something. That's the culprit. What's the culprit? And it's going to find that dead virus, and it's going to recognize that the next time. That's the theory anyway. Problem is those adjuvants. You'll hear vaccine manufacturers talk about this. The problem is the adjuvants. It's these things that are just toxic, just toxins, right? For example, you can get, there are limitations in some states on how much tuna you can eat because of the amount of, I believe it's aluminum, but we'll just say the amount of metals that are present in the tuna. But when it comes to the vaccines, it doesn't. There's way more aluminum present there than in the fish. But we have a warning. We have a warning on the fish, no warning on vaccine. You actually probably would find the warning in the small print in the vaccine on the labeling. But this is an example of how children are being taken advantage of. Parents too. What are you going to say? Like, you don't want your child to get sick, right? But are they going to get sick? Why have we been trained to think that this is the right thing to do? So the whistleblower is asked, what is the future of transgender medicine? So the doctor says, I pray that there is change. And that got me to thinking. So what do we do when we pray? How do we pray? How do we pray in a situation like this? Well, what prayer is it's cooperation with God in His plan, cooperating with God in His will. We're not praying to God to change His will. We pray to God so that we can cooperate with His will. We abandon our own desires in submission to the sovereign God. Corporate prayer, praying as a church, as a body, creates unity and strengthens the church to good works. And it will be the church, and only the church, that remedies these situations in the world. So I like that answer. That is the right answer. To pray that there is change, to ask God to lift His judgment from us. But he goes on and says, things I've been thinking about is what puberty blockers do to children. They come in the forms of monthly injections or implants, and they shut down the activity of the hypothalamus. This is where it gets really spooky. The hypothalamus is an almond-sized structure in your brain, and what it does is it controls all the other hormonal structures in your body. So it's like a central processing unit for all the other organs that are glands that put out hormones. So it regulates things. Specifically, things it does regulate are sexual development. It regulates emotions. It regulates the fight or flight response. Many, many things. It regulates all of them, actually. But it's not just a cold physiological term here. This is a really important, it's not just a hormone factory. This is an important part that makes who we are. The hypothalamus, it's this system that allows you to stand in awe of a beautiful sunset, to see the beauty of something and to appreciate it, to experience it, to feel it, to remember it.
It's like becoming robotic.
Yeah, so that's what this does. It kind of turns that off. You know, when you hear really beautiful music or you react emotionally to a movie or a play or something, this is regulated from the hypothalamus. You know, it's what causes us to stop and pay attention in life. Well, this is one of the things that puberty blockers affects the hypothalamus. Now, in Greek, this term hypothalamus, it means beneath the inner chamber. So it really is like it's a core part of who we are or how we experience the world. So to shut that system down, the doctor says, is to shut down what makes us human. And I thought that was very interesting because really, if you're shutting down what it means to be human, but you're still alive, it's as if they're, through experimentation on the children, they're creating zombies. So to bring it home, to finish this up here, we want to talk about this article here. It's another whistleblower from the City Journal, and this is titled "They're Wanting to Play God." This article was released earlier, probably about a month earlier. Christopher Rufo says, "Last week I worked with a whistleblower to expose the child sex change program at Texas Children's Hospital. Executives had promised to stop such procedures, but as the medical records demonstrate, this was not done. Doctors secretly continued to provide them and other hormones to children between the ages of 11 and 17. But within days of the story's publication, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton launched an official investigation saying, quote, children are not to be treated as science experiments. This whistleblower, who is a healthcare professional, said, we're ruining them. He says, I've just wanted to see for myself how he speaks. So this is Dr. Richard Roberts, is who the whistleblower is talking about. This whistleblower has worked very closely with Dr. Richard Roberts at Texas Children's Hospital. He said, I've been in the room with him when he speaks to these patients. I've just wanted to see for myself how he speaks to them and how these transgender patients, what they look like, what is their medical history, what other underlying medical conditions do they have, and it is absolutely astonishing. So many of the charts that I have read through in the course of doing their work, he finds out that they all have serious mental health issues. Overwhelmingly, they're autistic. You see what we have here, right? They have previous self-harm attempts in their history. They're depressed. They're on anxiety medications. All of them have a disability of some kind. Not 100%, but this hyperbolically here, Stan. Most of them, to this whistleblower's experience, have a disability of some kind. He says, quote, it's just absolutely wild. Whistleblower says it's just really sad. These kids they're looking for affirmation. They're seeking validation and approval from the adults that are in their lives, and they don't know any better. They're insecure. It says, in our hospitals, our doctors have gone full-blown woke and changed people's sex to whatever they identify as instead of their biological sex. There is, so here's another anecdotal story I thought was interesting. The whistleblower says, one particular story I want to share. There was a 10-year-old girl. I went into the room with the adolescent gynecology provider. And the little girl was transgender. She wanted to be referred to as her preferred name. So just make up a name. She wanted to be called John. She wanted to be referred to as John. She was with her mom, and they were of Hispanic origin. And they were there essentially because of this young girl's period. It was seeing the doctor about period-related issues. So the conversation gets going. This is where Dr. Roberts, let me make sure I get his name right again. This is Dr. Richard Ogden Roberts. So the doctor comes in and refers to her as him right away and says, John, what's going on? What can I do for you today? And the mom replies and accidentally refers to the daughter in her proper gender as her. The mother says, well, she is having these kind of issues and this kind of pain. And then the little girl turns around, looks at the mom, and she goes, I'm a he, Mom. I'm a he. The whistleblower says, and I'm in the room, and I'm watching this exchange. And the girl is this beautiful little girl, and she's dressed like a boy, very masculine, baggy pants, oversized shirt. And then the doctor asks this girl, how are your periods coming along? Would you like for your periods to go away? Do you feel uncomfortable? And of course, the little girl looks at the doctor and says, yes. Can we do that? I would love that. And then the doctor tells the girl, yeah, it's totally fine. You don't have to have a period at all if you don't want to. And of course, this is all because she's trying to transition to be a boy and she doesn't want a period. And the mother has a puzzled look. Apparently the mom had some real concerns here. And this provider totally shut her down. How? How is it possible that the doctor could shut down the parent in this situation? That's because these kids they've been trained. again, at the top of the show, social media, activists, influences, teachers in public school, they're everywhere. They've trained these kids. They said, these are the people you can trust. You cannot trust your parents at home. That was happening when I was in elementary school, I remember some teachers, I don't know if they were, I don't think it was part of this movement, but the public school system for a long time has been trying to get between parents and kids, because you want to create a national identity. You don't want them to have this connection to family and tradition, because that gives the people power when they have that. Whistleblower says Dr. Roberts is extremely encouraging of these kids and their transition, and will essentially do whatever he can to make sure that they are happy, at least externally happy, because, and the whistleblower says, I'm absolutely certain that they're not internally happy. The doctor is very accommodating. He does whatever they want. Essentially, there's no critical analysis of the process. So how fast is the decision actually made to start the puberty blockers? Whistleblower says these kids get coached on exactly what to say through social media, Reddit, for example, and a lot of other sites. And Dr. Roberts, for example, has a conversation with them, and he essentially starts them on puberty blockers almost immediately. Whistleblower says, in response to, what about the parents? Did they push back? Whistleblower says maybe one parent or two, at first they'll be confused. They're wondering, why is this happening? But then when they come to the appointment and they're there with Dr. Roberts, from what I can tell, what they show is that they're supportive. But it's more likely that they're just scared. But scared of what? Whistleblower says they're scared that if they don't affirm the child in whatever they say, that the child is going to self-harm, which is a lie. There's no evidence to support that. And they're intimidated by these doctors that are always on the side of the child, and these doctors who have a lot more power, especially in these gender clinics, especially today. Because the doctors could report the parent. Especially in California, the doctor could report the parent, and then the child could be taken away from them. And in California, it could be worse than that. The parent could be charged with abuse. So the whistleblower, describing how they feel about this, I'm absolutely sick to my stomach. Absolutely just devastated. Literally, sometimes I have to go outside and cry because I don't mean to be dramatic, but I truly feel like there is a demonic presence at my workplace. And it all happens because this industry, this transgender medicine industry, is so lucrative. It's like $70,000 or $80,000 per kid if they go through with the whole thing. All the pharmacology drugs, all these companies that are making millions of dollars. And the whistleblower says here, I make great money at what I do, and I have a great job. It's difficult, but I would be willing to lose my job because this does matter to me. I've come to the point where I'm just saying, this has to stop. And if I can help our attorney general or our governor to investigate my employer and provide them with documents or proof, well, then sign me up. And then what about the other people working there? What about this whistleblower's colleagues? Well, they're activists. The doctors are activists. And they live for the applause of the medical community that praises and glorifies this new industry, this up-and-coming success, this new progressive way of living.
Well, remember in our research, we figured out that the techno-medical industry is bigger than the military complex. So
yeah, more money involved there now.
More money from the medical industry than the military industry can be made.
Yeah, and that's all really new. That's within the last 10 years. It's amazing. By design. Yeah, by design. So these doctors are glorified, and it's exploded. The transgender wing of medicine that has exploded over the last 10 years, and the doctors are regarded as the up-and-coming cutting edge, and everyone's on their side. The media is on their side. Big tech is on their side. Activists are on their side. The government is on their side. Everybody's applauding every provider who does this. And I do think that they're changing the world by what they're doing. For better or worse, I think they believe that they're making their mark on history and they're wanting to play God. But ultimately, you can't play God. It's not going to turn out well, the whistleblower says. There's absolutely no proof that a transgender surgery will cure patients' depression or whatever mental health issue they're going through, which I believe is real. They believe they're going through some mental health issue because, as you've seen, they come in there with mental health diagnoses already. We have a generation of kids with mental health problems. It's very sad, and we need to treat these problems correctly, not by recommending that they change genders to fix their mental health problem. That has never worked, and it will never work. There's no proof that it will work anywhere in the literature. So yes, we are ruining them. They're going to wake up in 10 years and discover that they're infertile, that they can't have children, that their sexuality is completely dysfunctional, that they can't function as a normal person. And that realization is going to cause them to harm themselves when they wake up and realize that they've already been ruined. So you see, the truth is, it's not, remember, one of the main 3 tenets of the system now is when an individual believes he or she is of a certain sex, then they are affirmed as that sex. And then the ideal response is to affirm it, to affirm the preferred identity. And thirdly, the repercussion of non-intervention is a higher likelihood that child will self-harm. And there's no evidence anywhere to support that.
But, the thing is that remember when we were also doing that other research about how, 0 to 7 is when people are highly impacted if there's a traumatic event from 0 to 7, and then through that trauma causes the dissociation. So the trauma, and they're exposing kids to this overly graphic sex education, and of course that's going to give them issues and trauma. So the acting out is not even related to the gender dysphoria. Exactly. Yeah, that's the point. That's what we're saying at the top of the show is that how social media, right.
For one,
and sex ed.
I mean,
early on,
the kids spend way more time on social media than anything else,
and just watching shows.
Yeah, and then they go to school. If they go to public school, the teachers are activists. Everywhere they go, they're encountering activists. So,
but then on some level, they know that that this is wrong. Like they would have a sense somewhere that this is not right. This is wrong.
Well, that's the response. Whenever the human person, the human creature, is denying reality. Right, when we suppress the truth and unrighteousness, there's a reaction. It causes. It depends on how good you are at denying the truth, at denying reality. If there are some people that may move closer to the psychopath scale who have no problem with that at all. But for the most part, when we deny reality, there's a consequence for that, and a lot of times it's anxiety or some other form of something that gets diagnosed as a mental illness. But this is what makes this cultural battle so different from the traditional kind. Debates like, for instance, debates over the welfare state, debates about in the environment or gun control, or even abortion. Gender ideologues don't merely regard parents who believe in biological reality as the left has viewed religious people for decades, backward and outdated, nor do they regard children as a nuisance the way net zero climate activists often do. They see an opportunity to capitalize here. So the scriptural application here for this is to understand that the student will be like his teacher. The more we're encouraged to think like cold computers, and we've talked about here how the puberty blockers are going to cause a whole generation, praise God, it's not the whole generation, but it's a lot of them. We're going to have a generation of adults in 20 years' time who a great percentage of them are like cold computers. They are unfeeling, sort of zombified. And the more we're encouraged to think like this, the more we're encouraged to affirm evolutionary naturalism or Darwinian naturalism.
Yeah, people will literally have a different disposition in general.
Yeah, they'll be. Yeah, and people, what they'll say is, well, this is just evolution. We're just evolving to be more like the aliens. The more the thesis that computers must replace human thought becomes more reality, right? This is how Harari, this is how Yuval Noah Harari.
I guess they've got to deaden the human spirit and the emotions and get people really even keel in order to adopt the technology that they want to insert.
Yeah, no doubt about it that they have to definitely remove that. What it's all about is breaking a person away from their true origin as an image bearer of God, to break that connection, and that's clearly Satan. And so these children it's like they're being run through a meat grinder. Everywhere they turn, they're being taught this stuff. Luke 6:40. Luke chapter 6, verse 40 says, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. So that can be good or bad. In other words, what it's saying is we will become like those we follow, those we respect. So we must decide to choose good teachers to follow as parents or just as adults in communities influencing young people. This is our responsibility. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. So the job of a parent, of a community really, is not to simply let him grow up in any particular way. It's not to let the child go decide what's best for the child, but to train him up in the way he should go. But there's more to it than that. Train him in the way he should go means something specifically. The way he should go has at least two senses that complement each other. One is discerning the child's strengths and weaknesses, and then nurturing those, taking those into account. Like the book of Proverbs often presents this concept, or the concept of the way you should go, as being the path of wisdom. It's life that stands in stark contrast to the world. Life in contrast to the way of folly and destruction. It's mentioned in Proverbs 22:5. Thorns and snares are the way of the crooked. Whoever guards his soul will keep far from them. So this is what it means to train them up in the way they should go.
And that's why the powers that be want to have the ability to
Cut it
train them
off.
up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the point to make here today. Thank you. That's the thesis here. That's what we're talking about. That's what Joe Biden, when he says these kids are ours, that's what he means. They want to train them up in their way, in the way they think they should go. To train up, in this sense, also signifies to dedicate. Or in another sense, to train the child up in the way they should go, it means to consecrate. It's like the same, like the underlying text here has, it suggests something that's like to consecrate something or someone That means to dedicate it to the service of God. Now that's what the christening services are all about. This is, a child, a little baby can't make a choice to follow Christ, but it's a symbol, and in a lot of churches who do it, Lutheran churches, for example, it's a symbol of the parents dedicating the child, consecrating that child to God, and making a promise that they're going to train up the child in the way they should go. They're going to dedicate that child to God and nurture, teach, and discipline the child as God's child, because after all, God has entrusted the children into your care.
Right, and the big con is that this is a human rights campaign. This is a human rights issue.
Human rights.
That's their way of, getting their foot in the door and forcing it open and jumping in and grabbing your kid.
Isn't it funny, though, as they call it a human rights campaign?
It's not at all.
It's anti-human in every way.
The inverse, once again.
Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it. So there's a lasting effect on a child. We're not necessarily talking about children who even make a profession of faith in Christ. We're just talking about Christian parents raising up their child. That child will make that choice when and if God calls them. But this is important too, because he will not depart from it even when he's old. So this is an encouragement for parents of children who are older, perhaps adult children who have who were in the faith, who were going to church with them,
or just more motivation to do homeschooling.
Yeah, it is that for sure.
Yeah.
But then when these children get older, and they maybe turn away from the faith for a season, like the prodigal son did. When a child is trained in the proper way, consecrated to God early on, even though we're prone to wander and might just do it, solid training as a child makes it much more likely that he will return when his eyes have been opened, or like the prodigal son, when he runs out of money. Matthew 10:24 and 25. Again, this is Jesus speaking. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It's enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. Now, in this perfectly clear and logical truth, Jesus gave a wonderful promise. As we're taught by him, and as we grow in him. Now, Jesus trains us. As Christians, we're guided and we're taught by the Holy Spirit. As we, when we go in and study the Word of God, and we come away with more understanding than a person that's not in the faith would. So as we're taught by Jesus and we grow in him, we will become more like him, and more we become conformed to the image of Christ. And Romans 8:29 says, For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. And ultimately, when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. 1 John 3:2. So this is the goal of both the disciple and the servant of Jesus. We simply want to be like our teacher and master. Everyone does. And as we're conformed to the image of Christ, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. And so that's about all we've got, but I did want to share this with you. We got this book the other day.
Oh, yes.
Check this out. This will infuriate quite a few of you.
Climate Change for Babies.
I've actually got a picture of this.
I know you guys all want a copy.
Climate Change for
Just kidding.
Babies. By the way, my friends, please download that Armor of Truth mobile app. It is free, completely free, and you will find many new things there. You'll find a Bible study on the General Epistle of James there. The fourth episode is out now. Episode 5 coming out soon. You'll find a Tracking Dystopia podcast, which is going to be a podcast that Summer and I will work on. It's going to be the place where we're able to speak freely. We don't have to edit ourselves over there. So Check out the Armor of Truth mobile app, and if you'd like to support us, there is a Give tab where you can support us directly from the app, or you can use the links in the description to this video, or go to armoroftruth.net/donate. Climate change for babies. Now, I'm not going to read this whole
They
thing.
get them
to you,
young.
but you know, it's kind of like this. It's going to be
This
story
is
time.
a nightmare in and of itself. I mean, I remember when growing up, what was it, the Grimm tales? What was that called? Grimm Brothers. And that was really spooky. And there was a lot of scary stories in Disney, too, that would spook you. But imagine reading this.
Yeah. So this book
As a
starts
baby.
out, it really just starts out describing what the biosphere is and how it works, and generally does a good job at that. But then it gets here to this point. But people of the earth are changing the blanket that protects the earth. Industry, heating, coal power, transportation, livestock, and fertilizers all send greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Don't let your children see this. This is making the blanket heavier and thicker. A thicker blanket traps heat, making the earth feel unwell.
Because it has feelings.
Warmer temperatures cause the sea level to rise. Is that true?
It feels pretty cold this year.
Is that true? Is that true? Do warmer temperatures cause the sea level to rise? Well, it's okay because we're just training them up in the way they should go, right? Mm-hmm. And cause more extreme weather events.
Right, and then you see your parents who are like, oh, that's not true. And you're like, oh my gosh, my parent is horrible.
Right, that's the point. We must help our earth before it's too late. But what can be done? Right, the parents are not, they're not qualified anymore to train the children up in the way they should go.
No.
Well, here's the answer. Fewer cars and factories mean less greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We can replace coal and oil with solar and wind power, except in places where the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow. Trees capture and store carbon. We can protect our forests and plant new ones. If we all do our part, the earth will start to feel better. So the message here is that the earth is dying, and human beings are causing it. You can see how it's a Gnostic twist on Scripture.
Well, it's a humanistic twist, too, because, of course, we know that God will decide when the planet comes and goes.
Climate change is true, but it's not like that. Fervent heat, burned up, I think is the term. And it is true that the earth groans, the earth suffers from the original sin of mankind.
From the fall.
So this is about meta-narrative. They're teaching children a meta-narrative. As Summer said, it's a humanistic meta-narrative. It's an anti-God meta-narrative. It's a false meta-narrative worldview. The worldviews just answer the questions: who am I? Why am I here? Why does anything exist? What is the nature of reality? And again, we're going to keep bringing this to you so that everyone is clear on how we got here. First Director General of UNESCO, Julian Huxley. Now, this is from about the 20s and 30s is when all of this movement really got going to start training school children in this doctrine: a scientific world humanism. World government will be necessary for the next stage in human evolutionary progress. One of the major tasks of UNESCO is a restatement of morality that shall be in harmony with modern knowledge. That sounds just like the Godstones, right, Summer? Mm-hmm. And there's climate change for babies, right? Train them up in the way they should go. They're doing it. We should do it too. Let's listen quickly here to Harari just for a second. Because
Can't wait.
We're going to do Unstoppable
Excellent.
Us first.
Let's talk about this book. I'm so thrilled that you've done this. This is your first ever children's book.
Yes.
Unstoppable Us, How Humans Took Over the World. Why was it important for you to write a book for younger readers?
Because I wanted to really help them understand the world. I think that fake news have been with us for thousands of years. Just think of the Bible. I mean, all this story about Jesus rising from the dead and being the Son of God, this is fake news. And help them understand who they are. Humans are now hackable animals. You know, this is the biggest question maybe in the life of every kid. Not the intelligent design of some God above the clouds, but our intelligent design. I mean, what am I? Humans are now hackable animals. And you know, the world is so complicated and sometimes frightening. It's about what's happening right now. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. This is my free will. That's over.
That's over, says Harari. Free will is over, right? It's the idea that I have a soul and all that, that's over. That's just old news, right? That's fake news. Well, that's Harari and what Harari has done. Summer covered this very well in a video you can find in the Armor of Truth Live playlist, which is now also a podcast available on YouTube. And also there's a clip with the section of Summer's presentation of the details of Unstoppable Us. Basically, like the climate change for babies, teaching toddlers about current events.
Yeah, we can drop that in the, we can drop that under the video. I'll put the link in there to it later.
Yeah. So, yeah, Unstoppable Us, How Humans Took Over the World is what, that's the subtitle of Harari's book here, released in October of last year. Hasn't been out a year yet now. And I think we covered it right as it was coming out. And it's marketed at children from 10 to 14 years of age. The front book jacket says, "The strangest tale you'll ever hear, and it's a true story." Is it? Yeah, he knows it's not a true story. So what is the idea of telling the children that it's a true story? Well, it's because Harari, he believes that, and he's right about this. He's right about the fact that it's very important what stories we tell ourselves, because it makes us who we are, or it helps us, it forms us in some way. The problem with his theory is that clearly it doesn't matter if that story is true. According to Harari, you can have a false worldview. You can have a worldview that affirms things that are not true, and that'll be good for you. Right? This is the darkened mind. This is the compromised intellect. Let's see here. I had Harvard Bookstore said, from world-renowned historian and philosopher Yuval Noah Harari, the New York Times best-selling author of *Sapiens*, comes exciting brand new illustrated book for middle grade readers that looks at the epic true story of how humans learned to not only survive but also thrive on Earth. It's a deadly meta-narrative, and it's headed straight for your children and public schools all over the world. And we've chosen to not stand idly by and watch that happen and watch Christ's name be dishonored. This guy's not shy about stating his beliefs. So ultimately, in his book, it's Harari's worldview. There is no God, there is no soul, and there is no free will. And once these pillars are accepted as truth by his followers, many of whom are in positions of power, then the next step will be deciding the fate of billions of people who are no longer necessary in a future world that consists of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and transhumanism. And so that's Harari's position. Right, that's anti-human for sure. And as we pointed out on our show the other day, he has struck up a very important relationship with Russell Brand, who has also written a children's book. Believe it or not, there it is.
I love how it's called Trickster Tales.
Trickster Tales, right? So from The Guardian, they interviewed Russell Brand about this. Russell Brand aims to make the young people grow up wanting a revolution. Right. Yeah. So his idea, let's raise a whole generation of rebels, because that sounds like a good idea. And how are we going to do it with this book? Well, we're going to conjure the trickster, and we're going to use the tale of the Pied Piper.
And indeed, it is a trickster.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll define trickster for you in just a minute, because that's important to know. So Brand says, I think the Pied Piper is such an interesting figure. I won't be doing the accent. When you think about it, it's weird what he did. Taking them children away. And it makes you ask questions.
Right, that's what the Piper did.
Right. Why did he do it? Is that okay? Why did it happen? What's the story trying to tell us? The Pied Piper makes you think. There's something about it. You have your basic story. There's a town. The town has a rat problem. The town calls the Pied Piper. The Pied Piper gets rid of the rats. The town doesn't pay the Pied Piper, and the Pied Piper takes the children. But everything else is up for grabs. You can change it. You can set it anywhere in the world. You can say it means anything you like. That's Brand. That the Pied Piper's pipe leads the children away with the pipe is really significant, because music is something that has a powerful effect that we can't really understand. In itself, it's a metaphor for the other things that have an effect on us that we can't see or even really understand. Continuing, Russell Brand says, the Pied Piper is a popular, well, this is me. This is my part here. The Pied Piper is a popular folktale. All right, so he did say in here also that it helps us to understand, in his position, his opinion, helps us understand things like God and metaphysical concepts. But so what is this story? It's a popular folktale that originated in Germany in the Middle Ages about a musician, a piper who was hired to rid the town of its rat infestation.
Of course, because they can never think of anything original. They just have to refurbish everything.
No, you got to recycle the archetypes. So the piper plays a magical tune on his pipe that lures the rats away from the town. But when the townspeople refused to pay him for his services, he retaliated by playing another tune. Right? The musician, the rock band, comes into town, and all the children follow them out like the Grateful Dead. Plays another tune that lures away all of the town's children. According to the legend, this musician played a seductively hypnotic song, and the town's children followed him willingly.
Man.
Entranced.
This is like revelation of the method again.
Yeah. They followed the piper away to a mysterious cave where they disappeared and were never seen again. Some version of the story suggests the children were taken to a magical land. They wanted to pretend like it was a
virtual
happy thing.
Reality.
Others suggest that they were drowned in a nearby river. The truth is they were taken away from their parents. Is that a theme that we see here today?
And it's like, here, pay for the book and make me rich.
Well, the moral of the story is, though, there's consequences, for not keeping your word. There's even greater consequences for falling for an appeal to emotion, for not calling things by their proper name. Isaiah 5:20. Identifying that which is evil as evil and that which is good as good. Oh, here Brand says, I'm talking about love, God, etc. When I was a little kid, I hadn't heard of things like be in the moment. Didn't know about invisible forces you can't access, or that you shouldn't get distracted by materialism. But those things are in folk tales and fairy tales from all over the world. And that's why they're important. Brand is also certainly famous for, today anyway, as the big he's the big anti-authority guy. He wants change in politics in the world, right?
Right, but that fits right in with the activism that they want to give they want children and young people to be activists. Sorry. So. And
that's what he's doing, right? Yeah, he says, someone told me that children are growing up now, and they'll be cosmically inclined to think differently. So Brand says, so I think if you give them information now while they're young, they'll grow up knowing a lot more and asking more questions. And the reporter asks, you're a bit of a trickster yourself, aren't you? He said, yeah, more than anything else, I'm a trickster. It makes more sense to me. Whenever you talk about change, you're put in a moral position. People say you're asking for change, you'd better become perfect immediately. How come you've got a house then if you want things to change? Why don't you go and live in the gutter? Well, yeah. So anyway, he goes on. Here's what a trickster what Russell Brand wants to identify as. Now he claims to love Jesus Christ. I've heard him say that. We saw that just yesterday. We were watching some clips of him. But Jesus Christ is nowhere to be found here. Not nowhere. And the trickster, right? This is an archetype of Satan. The trickster archetype is a common character found in mythology, folklore, literature. The trickster is cunning and mischievous, a figure who uses deception, wit, unconventional methods to disrupt the established order.
Well, Russell Brand looks and acts, how animated he gets?
Yeah.
He looks and acts almost like a jester in a king's court.
Well, yeah, that's a comedian. He's
got that archetype going on.
Definitely there to distract you. The trickster archetype is often portrayed as a boundary crosser, blurring the lines between right and wrong and embodying both positive and negative qualities. Tricksters are also presented as arrogant, rebellious, very clever. They outsmart others with humor, satire, subtle deception. Brand tells you that's what he is. Typically to expose hypocrisy or to challenge authority. The trickster embodies the concept of the fool. Is that something you want to identify with? Right. Generally, the trickster has psychic energies that and here's what's most important. Typically, the trickster archetype transcends gender. All of this is just packed into this whole story here of train them up in the way they should go. They're definitely doing that. Brand, as a trickster archetype himself, represents the disruptive force that exists within society, pushing the boundaries, right? Challenging established norms. That sounds like the right thing to do, doesn't it? No, but it's through cunning. It's through unconventional behavior. It's through deception. Satan is the father of lies. He's the author of confusion. And this is why I thought it would be important to share these pieces with you here, because they're taking the children, right? This is they're planning it. They're planning it.
They're doing it.
Yeah. Doing whatever they can to influence the kids and to take them away. Right? They're creating laws, they're doing whatever they can to convince the children that parents are idiots. Well, biomedical technology, like all technologies, is a god that limps and ultimately is unable to save. Medical ethics becomes a pressing issue at the least expected moments in our world. So it's necessary to consider the issues before circumstances force you to face them. You can't sit on the couch anymore. You can't pretend like this stuff is coming. It's here now. Our understanding of the character of God and the principles of our faith must be the primary lens. It's got to be our foundation and the grid through which all such decisions will pass. Because of the consequences, biomedical ethics is far too important to leave to these doctors and these healthcare administrators, because they've clearly also been captured by the evil one. The practice of transplanting tissue and organs and these gender surgeries, they've become so routine that new advances are barely noticed. For example, fetal tissue harvested from aborted children and organ transplants from anencephalic children. As believers, our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and we have a duty as stewards of the body to maintain it as God designed it. All of it is designed by God for His purpose. Exodus 4. Exodus 4 is where God tells you that when you see a handicapped child or a handicapped person or deformed person or someone with disabilities, that's God. That's Exodus 4 tells you. And for some reason, there's something in that for His glory. Believers must be prepared by God's grace to refuse the benefits of ungodly technologies. This doesn't mean we shun it all. This doesn't mean we don't do as much as we can for the disabled child, the deformed child. We should, because God has given us, He's allowed us to progress, to be able to mitigate suffering. But we've got to be prepared by God's grace to refuse ungodly technologies and face their earthly death with the assurance that our light and our momentary troubles are achieving an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. 2 Corinthians 4:17-18. While today's doctors may act like modern high priests, there's only one true high priest, the author and finisher of our faith, Christ Jesus. In Hebrews, Jesus is clearly portrayed as the ultimate priest whose work makes obsolete all those who came before or followed after. Hebrews 2, verses 14 and 17 say, He was made like us, has suffered beyond our suffering, and His priestly work is comprehensive, redeeming body and soul for eternal life. It is a work that is perfect and complete, not lacking anything. Acknowledge your dependence on Him for each and every breath. Determine that when challenged by such trials as these, you will, by His grace, not only live, but also be willing to die coram Deo, or before God, before the face of God, under His authority and in His gentle priestly care. R.C. Sproul wrote a piece for Table Talk magazine years ago, and he said, "You shall be like gods" was the original temptation, the archetypal seduction aimed at our first parents by the serpent. God created them to be vice regents, appointed to act on behalf of God and to have dominion over the earth. Adam and Eve wanted more. They stretched their greedy arms toward the throne of God, reaching for autonomy, but instead they fell headlong into the abyss of evil. Expulsion from Eden was their fate. They could not go back. There was no going back. Paradise was lost, much like these children who are coerced in many ways to make choices that they can't go back from. Paradise was lost. An angel with a flaming sword was placed by God to stand guard at the gateway to the garden, and that is the first reference in Scripture to a weapon of any kind. Before God gave the power of the sword to men or the government, He gave it to the angel to patrol and guard the entrance to paradise. And when the fall came, what came with it was a rapid expansion of sin. One son of Adam and Eve murdered his brother, introducing fratricide to the human history. This violence was followed by Lamech, who celebrated warfare in his famous sword song in Genesis 4. Man, who was originally given dominion and called to dress, till, and replenish the earth, used his nascent technology to turn the tools of farming into implements of war, which is what we see here. The advancements in technology and medicine that the Lord has allowed us, you see them being used for evil. The plowshare became a sword, and the call to subdue the earth was distorted into a conspiracy to conquer one's brother. The means of production became the means of destruction, and human technology and scientific discovery were used not to honor God, but to assault Him by attacking His creation and His image bearers. Then God said no to the expansion of corruption and brought the flood, a storm of judgment upon the earth, a deluge to clean the planet. After the flood, Noah and his family began to repopulate the earth. And then Noah's descendants became hunters, Nimrod for one, and great builders. A new technology emerged to provide a stabler and more suitable shelter. Brick and mortar became the means by which whole cities could be built. Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone, but here they were still using tar for mortar. Some kind of petroleum substance it was. It was the same stuff that Noah used to seal up the ark, the same kind of stuff that Moses' little basket was sealed up with. It was placed in the river. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches into the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. So that we may make a name for ourselves. Does that sound like the doctors that we mentioned earlier? We still grasp for autonomy, refusing to have God rule over us. Immediately after the flood, Noah built an altar, a structure upon which to offer the sacrifice of praise and worship. The building project at Babel was something else. Again, it was a reach of pretended autonomy, a stretch for heaven, an attempt to rip God down from his throne so that man might make for himself a name, an attempt to outlast God if he should ever bring one of those floods again, which he promised not to do. And you can see the Babylonites were not familiar with God's word, or they rejected it, didn't trust him, didn't believe him. The result of their effort, this primitive scientific undertaking, was chaos. So the result of the effort to make a name for yourself in the world with an unfaithful use of technology led to chaos. And this is what we see right now. In the case of the Babylonites, at that time, the chaos was the languages. The language of man was confused, and communication gave way to babbling. That looks like it might just happen again. When it looks like no one can tell, no one knows what is the truth, all of these ideas that are clearly anti-human being called human, being called in support of humanity. This pattern hasn't changed. The greater the technology becomes, the greater the biotechnology becomes, the greater the chaos in our world. The more sophisticated the tools, the more sophisticated the violence. Back in the Canaanites, when they would offer their children to Molech, it was a huge deal, a celebration. Everyone was around. Musicians, bands, I guess we would call them, playing loud music to drown out the sounds of the children who screamed as they were thrown into the fire. Sacrifices. The greater the technology, the greater the chaos. The more sophisticated the tools, the more sophisticated the violence. Today, it's done in a sterile environment where no one watches. And everyone pretends that it didn't happen. And the same with the transgender medical theory. Mutilating the body of child. The 20th century is an example of how sophisticated the violence has become. The technological advances of our age have eclipsed all previous generations. The most peaceful century in human history was the first century. The second peaceful century was the 19th century. That's the 1800s. The century that evoked an unprecedented spirit of human optimism, and came the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment concluded that man no longer needs the God hypothesis to explain his origins and purpose, separating man from his origin story. An optimistic humanism was born that promised a coming utopia. Education, science, and technology would produce the dogma of evolutionary development. Peace would prevail, and poverty, disease, crime, and war would be banished by the modern techniques of government, economics, and education. But then, World War I burst that bubble. Until it was decreed the war to end all wars. Somebody forgot to tell that to the sons of Lamech, Mussolini, Tojo, Stalin, Mao, and the corporal from Bavaria, Herr Hitler. The 20th century brought a new horror to world history. The phenomenon of global war, the new warfare engaged alliances from east and west in wars numbered by Roman numerals and punctuated by a mushroom cloud. We cannot blame this on technology. It's not the instruments that are culpable, it's the users of the instruments. The same scalpel that is used to save a life in surgery is now used to hack to pieces millions of unborn babies, used to carve up and mutilate our youngest and our future Americans. The same atomic energy that supplies power for living is also harnessed for weapons of incalculable destruction. The technological explosion proliferates in geometric proportion, yet the human spirit of corruption remains. Right? All we need is more stuff and we'll be better people, won't we? More biotechnology and we can be better. We're progressing. No. The human spirit of corruption remains. Not only remains, but waxes greater. We're still trying to be as God. We still grasp for autonomy, refusing to have God rule over us. Today, we reach beyond the heights of an ancient ziggurat, that city and tower complex on the plains of Shinar. We call what we do today a real step forward for mankind. Right? That was Armstrong's quote, right? We're indeed enlightened. No longer do students carry switchblades to school. They carry guns. Yes, how enlightened we are. Gangsters don't use Tommy guns. They've become obsolete in the face of assault weapons and rocket launchers. How enlightened we've become. The battering ram has yielded to the intercontinental ballistic missile. How enlightened we've become. Our cities are armed fortresses, and we need more brick and mortar for prisons. How enlightened we've become. We're still confused. Our politicians babble to us daily on the magic technology of a television or your computer screen. And still everyone does what is right in his own eyes. How enlightened we've become. Karl Marx believed that whoever controls the means of production, the tools, controls the world. The race for technological supremacy is the race for dominion. Autonomy is the prize. But there is no technology sophisticated enough to fulfill the serpent's seductive promise. That we can take comfort in. We are not gods. We shall not be gods. We cannot be gods. Only God can be God. Only God can be supreme. The issue in Eden is the same issue today. Who will have dominion over man and man's technology? Our margin of error shrinks every day. There is no technology sophisticated enough to fulfill the serpent's seductive promise. Now we have the technology and the techniques not to destroy God, but to destroy ourselves. And this is technological madness. And in the case of our story today, it is biotechnological madness. All right, that's all we have for you today. So you have do you want to say
You said it all perfectly.
a few parting words for our family?
Thank you guys for being here with us once again, and we hope to have a Tracking Dystopia out for you guys tomorrow or the next day.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being with me here today on this show, Summer. Thanks, folks, for joining us. Download the Armor of Truth mobile app. Do it today. It's absolutely free.
You're beating them over the head with that one.
Well, we just want to make sure, because I'll tell you why this is so important. We're not going to be here on YouTube forever. You know, clock is ticking. And if you want to hear, uncensored, truly uncensored takes on some of these things, this is where you're going to find it. Get the Armor of Truth mobile app. And also, when we go live on YouTube, we send out the notification through this app. And that's how you know exactly when we're coming on live. Because what's the point? YouTube seems to block a lot of those notifications. People don't seem to get them, or whatever's happening. This way seems to work. All right, folks, thank you for being with us today. We'll see you again next time, Lord willing.
God bless.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth. Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel. And log on. armoroftruth.net.